Hi everyone, and welcome to the real-time coloring video for this 2-video feature for the 1st of January. Today's video is all about the coloring challenge over at Make It Crafty that started today, which is coloring skin. It's a very simple challenge. If you head over to the Make It Crafty store blog, you will find all the details of the challenge, but basically you are supposed to color skin. If you are kind of afraid of coloring skin or want to build on your skin coloring knowledge, Make It Crafty has a whole bunch of really awesome ebook tutorials which you can follow along all by yourself with included digis to show you how to do stuff. But you can also head over to the Make It Crafty Facebook group and ask questions there, and the design team, Zoe, and all the other people that are hanging in that group can answer your questions if you have any. So for my video feature, I wanted to change things up. I'm all about inclusivity. Whatever color of skin you have, whatever faith you believe in or not believe in, and wherever you come from, whatever language you speak, I want to be a part, or I want to bring you and include you. And one of the way to do that is to change up my skin colors now and then. And today I am doing that with a really dark African queen color scheme. So that is one of the things that I feel that has been missing, and it's not a very easy thing to do. If you Google Copic skin colors, you find a whole bunch of skin colors, but they are either very light or very hard to blend. And there are reasons for that, and I thought I will go into them in just a minute. But so I went on a hunt for a good color combination, and what I did was I googled African Queen because I wanted that really deep, dark, beautiful brown skin color. And then I sat down with those images and my Copics, and I tried so many different combinations, and I finally landed on this, which basically is a 2-layer combination, where I started off with the E70s, the 71, 74 and 77, and have them as kind of my bottom layer, creating the darkness. However, I felt that they were a little bit too purple and too grey, and I wanted a little bit more life into that color. So I added some E10s, the E18, the E17 and the E15 to kind of layer on top of that to give this deep brown color. And I think it worked out really good. However, it ended up being a little bit redder than I was thinking about. So I'm going to continue to work on this and figure out, see if I can find more colors like this. It's a lot of fun. I love mixing and matching colors and trying to figure out a way to get what I want. Now into why coloring dark skin tones can be very hard. For one, I'm Caucasian myself, so I see myself in the mirror every day, and therefore Caucasian skin is kind of what I default to because that is what I'm used to looking at. The other thing is that coloring dark with Copics is hard. And I mean, it's really, really hard. And the reason for that is that to make something look really dark, you want a really high contrast. But blending Copic pencils in a high contrast is actually pretty hard. And it's not impossible, but it can be hard for a beginner, but it's actually hard for me, and I've been doing this for a lot of years now. So if you look at other mediums, for example, if you look at acrylics or you look at oil, then you can do your darkness and shading, and then you can go over and do light glazes where you want the highlights to be and kind of bring back the lightness. When you work with Copics, you can't really lighten up an area. You can try using the colorless blender, but when you're working really, really dark, you will just end up getting your creation all blotchy. So you really have to think about how you start with your darks and then with very, very little and work towards the lights. And when you do that, kind of maybe add a couple of different layers to give it a little bit more of the darkness during the layers, instead of adding all the darkness in the beginning. But the biggest problem is the blending, because to make it look dark without losing definition, you need more contrast than when you work on lighter areas. And therefore, you kind of want the light to be very light and the dark to be very dark. And blending those two isn't the easiest. So I kind of come up with this combination because I knew that the E70, 71, 4 and 7 is actually, they blend pretty good. You can get a pretty good blend with those. And then I knew that the E18, E17 and E15 also would give me a pretty good blend. And by layering on top of each other, I would come to the color that I wanted. I still feel that I would have wanted something that had a little bit more of a highlight, that it was a little bit lighter. And I might be able to do that by adding the E70 at the bottom layer and then going in with something lighter than E15. However, when you're going with something lighter than the E15, you start going towards a lot more pink. But you can probably play around with it. But yeah, those are the kind of skin thoughts I had behind this skin color. But I will be trying to add more skin colors in my creations throughout this year. I want to be more inclusive, have more different ideas, different way of doing stuff. So yeah, I think that was all about the color, about that skin color. Now towards the coloring. So a lot of the coloring with how I put the shading for the muscles and stuff, I have learned from the skin toning ebook by Zoe, but I haven't put everything right. I would have wanted, I did these arms I think 4 times on 4 different characters and I still didn't get them exactly the way I wanted, but I think this was okay. And again, the shading in the face isn't perfect, but the legs are perfect, so I chose this image to go with, because those knees, those are my absolute favorite of this whole card. I just love it. So when it comes to shading body and shading darkness, also another thing when it comes to shading dark stuff is to think about the rim light. Because usually when you have a dark skin, you might have dark hair, you might have dark things around it. And there is a way to make things stand out even though they have a dark background. And that is using rim light, and basically using your lightest highlight just at the edge of what you are creating, even where you have your rounded shadow. So if you look at her arm that is holding the glasses, she has a the rounded shadow goes from on the underneath part on her upper arm, and that is going upwards, but I still have that teeny tiny sliver of rim light at the bottom of the arm, and that is to make it then stand out against the hair when I come to the hair. So I do this all planning. And also one thing that can be good if you struggle of getting contrast in your skin and in your face, try coloring the rest of the image first and then go in with the skin, because that will help you to kind of evaluate how much contrast you really need, because you usually need more contrast than you give, because working towards a white background, you will automatically try to not add as much contrast because you don't need it when it is that light. But when you start adding other dark areas, you will be needing more contrast in what you are coloring. So that is another tip if you want more contrast, if you want to have more dimension. Can't really speak right now. Contrast will create dimension if it's used in the right way. I like having good blends. Good blends are making things look rounded, for example, where you don't really have those lines between the different colors, but it's more of a gradient color that goes. That will create a more rounded effect. I still use very high contrast to do that, just because I want it to I want the lighter to be very light and the darks to be very dark, because that will help you create that rounded effect. The bigger the contrast between the lights and the darks, the more you will get, the more dimension you will get if you get a good blend. Another thing with a good blend, which I've been working on this image and my previous video that I put up the day before yesterday, where I actually worked in small areas. Like here I did the knees first, or the legs first, then I did the arms and the upper body, and then I'm going in the face. And I'm doing that because I want to have a better blend. I want to keep the area that I'm coloring kind of wet, saturated with the alcohol, so that I can blend on top of it. If you start saturating with, for example, the colorless blender as the first layer, you might get issues with splotching, because you won't have control on how the pigment lays. When you're adding ink with the colorless blender, you don't see if you have streaking or such, and the wetter the area is, the more different the ink will move, or the pigment will move, because that is why it's easier to blend something that is wet than blending something that isn't wet with that alcohol. It is because the pigment moves in the alcohol, sort of. So I usually, there's a whole bunch of different tips on how to do stuff. One is, if you don't mind getting it very dark, you can go from light to dark, then from dark to light. You will always want to finish from dark to light, because you always want to blend out the darker color with the lighter color after you added the darker color. When I want to do a quicker coloring, I usually just go from dark to light, sometimes adding the shadows in with either the lightest color or an even lighter color, just to kind of map things out without ruining the picture. And then when I know how things looks like, how I want it to look like, I'm going in with my darker colors. And I'm starting with the darker, then I'm blending that out with the next color, and so on. This will not be as easy to blend because you're working on a dry surface. However, you can either then start off by covering the whole piece that you're coloring then with a light pen. This will, however, strangely make your image darker, because you have put down a layer of pigment, and that is how Copics works. Or you can go from light to dark and then from dark to light again. This will also make it a little bit darker than it would be with one layer, but it works wonders on your blending. And the third part in blending has to do with paper. There is a lot of different papers out there that you can work with. Some are very easy to blend on, some are harder to blend on, and you have to try them out. The rule of thumb is that papers that have a very dense fabric, they are usually pretty thick cardstock, and they're pretty slick cardstock. Those papers are easier to blend on when you have gotten the ink down, because that you have more, you can add more layers, and therefore you can blend better. While papers that have a little bit more texture, that for example Nina, which is a pretty good Copic coloring paper, because you can do Copic coloring on it. However, when you come to layer 2 or 3, you start experiencing bleeding, where it actually bleeds out of the edges. You will always have bleeding through the paper. The thicker the cardstock you use, the less visible will that bleeding be. But you will always have bleeding through the paper, because that is how the Copics blend. The pigment seeps down into the fibers of the cardstock. I use Make It Crafty cardstock, or Make It Color cardstock. I have a link in the description to where you can find it. I think that is the only place where you can find it, but I really love it. I know if you're in the States, Hamel is one of those. I would recommend going and look at Jennifer Dove's blog. She always uses Hamel and swears by it, because I think the link I have is for the UK. You can still buy it from there, but the Make It Crafty cardstock. I know that there is a no line coloring from My Favorite Things, but my way of coloring at first tries didn't really work, but I'm gonna try it more, because I want to see if I can get it to work. But that is a super dense, so it's denser than the Make It Crafty cardstock, which means they have to work harder for the blend. Then you have the Copic coloring, the expressive blending cardstock, which is similar to the Make It Crafty. So there's a lot of different papers, but you want to invest in a good paper if you want to have good blends. Paper that really don't work if you use the Copics for blending is, for example, watercolor cardstock. The paper is way too not dense, I don't know, it's way too textures, it's way too loose, that's the word, so it will be hard to blend on it. However, if you work in layers with other materials, watercolor cardstock, working with Copics on watercolor cardstock can actually do pretty fun things. You can get pretty fun things out of it, but just Copics and watercolor cardstock is not something I would recommend. And if you want to see videos on how to work that kind of watercolor cardstock and like watercolor combinations, Kelly Lattevola, I think her name is, I just mispronounce her last name every time. She does a bunch of flowers that way. I think I have one that kind of combination on my channel also, so you can find it. I think it is the Create a Smile flower that do a combination of it. Anyhow, blending will work best on a denser cardstock, and it will work best if you keep your area wet. So yeah, that was a very long discussion about those. But this video is close to 50 minutes long, so yeah, or something 44 minutes I think it is. So you have to bear with me. I'm gonna fill it up with kind of nice information. So we have jumped on to the hair. We've gone through the eyes. She has very small eyes, so I haven't done a lot of coloring on them. I just added a couple of browns with the darker browns at the corners, and the more to the center of the eye you come, I add lighter browns. I also went in with a B63 just under her eyelashes, so that you get a rounding on the eyeball, which makes the eye look a little bit more dimensional and a little bit more alive. I also added a couple of streaks onto her glasses. Now there's so many different ways to color glasses. We just want to put it out there. If you just look at a person on the glasses directly, you will not see the glass. However, if you have any kind of light, there will be some kind of reflection, and I chose to basically just do reflection all over those glasses, so you can't see any kind of shading or anything behind her glasses. It's just shaded. It's just completely shaded. So to the hair, I'm doing a combination of different E40s. I didn't want it to be too dark because, again, very dark colors have a tendency to run together and kind of lose dimension. But I did want to have some really deep dark shades to give the hair a lot of a dimension. So I'm starting off with the E49. I'm just going in on different strands of the hair. A few things that I'm really thinking about is to only put the darkness either in those small crevices or in the middle of her braids. I want to have small, teeny tiny rim lights on both of the sides of her strands, but I'm not going for the lightest rim lights for all of the strands. Instead, where I've done the E49 as the middle color, I'm going in with the E47, and I'm actually coloring the whole strand with it, because you do get the dimension, but you also get the feeling of the hair being very, very far back. And I should have put a rim light on her neck, which I didn't. So now her neck kind of disappears in her hair. But that's a tip. If you put a little bit of a teeny tiny rim light at the edge of her neck, just where it is shadowed, then her neck would kind of stand out a little bit from her hair, and it would look like her neck wouldn't disappear as it does here. I'm then going through my colors. I'm not going to have, I said again, I'm not going to have a super dark hair. Instead, I'm adding all of the E40s, I think down to E42 or something, might not be really that light, from strand to strand. The strands closest to us are the one with the lightest color combinations, and the strands further away are the ones that gets the darkest ones, or the ones that are hidden in her hair. And I try to do that to give her hair dimension and give the hair strands a little bit more life. And I'm actually going for a kind of a mid to light brown in the end, which is the lightest of her braids, because I thought that would be a kind of a cool color combination for her. With these, like, you can color hair in so many different ways, and with these strands or these braids or dreads or what they are called, there are so many different ways to do this. You can get them dimensional, you can get them textured, you can do a lot of different things. I have chosen to make them very simple with just kind of a middle the dark part is just in the middle and it doesn't fill up the hole. I'm leaving like highlights. In the end, I will be filling them up with lighter colors because I very rarely leave white highlights, but I'm trying to kind of give it like it looks like it is some kind of stranded by having those flicks. It looks like it has a little bit of a strand in it, so it actually ends up looking like it's hair and not something else. But you could spend the time and adding details, like small curly curl details. You can go in with pencils to add details to make the hair look more like dreads. But I kind of actually liked how they end up looking when going through these. There are a few things that, again, I wish I did different, because that is, for me, a part of coloring is always figuring out how I can take the image to the next step. When I've finished an image, even if I'm super happy with it, I'm trying to figure out, is there something else here that I would be able to, if I did this differently, it would end up being a little bit better. A few things is I probably should have looked more at images and see how the hair would take up the little bangles that she has all through her hair, kind of how it would shade the hair. And also she has a hairband. I think I would have wanted to shade around that hairband a little bit more so that it really looks like the hair is held together by that band. So those are kind of the things that I thought about that I wanted to finish or change. But it's a lot of, this is one of the things I really love with the Make It Craft images, that most of them are hair intensive, so you would get a lot of coloring time for your buck, sort of speaking. They are hair intensive. You can work a lot with the hair, trying to figure out how you want the dimension to be. But and they also have a lot of skin and a lot of folds. There are a lot of details that you can play around with, but you also have to know that you don't really need to add all those details. You can go in and make it a little bit lighter, a little less contrasty in some areas, and by working with contrast in some areas and less contrast in other areas, you can actually make your viewer's eye move around. And I really like that. I've been playing a game. So I'm a gamer. I've been a gamer since I was a little girl. Games was the reason why I started programming when I was younger, and why I went into software development. Today I kind of like development of any kind, but gaming was what kind of that drove me in there. And I've been playing a kind of a manga anime game called Xenoblade, and I'm like 150 hours into the gameplay. It's a huge game, it's a lot of fun, and it's a really awesome story. But one of the things I really like with the game is that you can look at the characters and you can see the different way they shade them. Now, manga characters or animation overall, if you look at in movie pictures from Disney or anime series or manga or whatever, they're I call all of them manga and anime. It works better. But if you look at the animation part, they will have very, very little shading. They will be pretty flat. And this is because you want to make things when you animate things, you don't want to add too much details because you have to make that detailing move. So in-game is usually not that shaded. However, if you look at book covers, DVD covers, all of those things for Disney or animes, you will get a much more detail, a much more dimension, and you can use that information figuring out how to color images like this. And this image is basically a anime character. You can see it in the big eyes, the little nose, and things like that. So if you want to learn more about how they color those kind of characters, I would look at book covers and DVD covers. It's super ideal. But anyhow, I've been playing this game and they have a lot of video sequences in it with these characters, and they're so beautiful, but they also get me like color combination ideas and ideas on how to color the hair differently. One girl, she has this teal, I think it's like blue to teal, where it is blue in the bottom and goes up to teal in the hair, and then she has motions which you can't really do. You can't get them look like they're moving because it's not animated, but she has this lightning rods going in her hair. It was so cool. I really want to try that once. But yeah, so you can get inspirations for how to color a little bit everywhere. So now the hair is done. As you see, it ended up being pretty light, and I'm going into the clothing. And I was after a light suede. This is like a suede dress. It just screamed being a suede dress. And this was also the reason why I didn't want to go like platinum blonde dreads on her, because I knew I wanted the E40s in her clothing. And now you see here, she is pretty monochrome. She just have browns. Sure, she has a little bit of grayish browns and a little bit of reddish browns, but she's just brown. I'm going to add a little bit of detail in her bangles to get some color in her, but very little color, because I wanted to keep her this monochrome, because then it's much easier to make a background, because you can use whatever colors you want to, because they won't mismatch with how she is colored. But I'm doing the suede, and I'm doing E40s, E43 to E40. I think I did E50 as a top layer, but I'm not sure. Might not have been. We'll see. I don't really have the papers here. I do have 1 or 2 papers, but I'm not sure that... No, I didn't use the E50. I just used the E40s. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of following all of the little lines to give those folds. Now, folds is something I still struggle with. I still try to figure out where to put my shadows on her shoes and everything. I think they ended up looking pretty good, but still there's probably more I can do. I think I have to sit down and do some kind of look at images with a lot of folds, a lot of manga and anime. There you can get help, because even if it's cell shading, basically when it's not blended, where the shades, when you have the shading, it's just a kind of blocks of color that shows like it would be shaded, but it's not a blended shade. That kind of shading can help you to figure out where to put different shadows. So I think I have to sit down and think about it a little bit more when I'm playing my Xenoblade game, which is a lot of fun. But anyhow, I'm not going for contrast. I'm not going for dimension. I'm just going to get a little bit of roundness and a little bit of color into her clothing, so that it looks like it is clothing, but not so much more. I wanted it to be super simple, because she does have so much texture in her hair, she has so much color in her skin, and I didn't want the clothing to kind of overtake that. But somehow I think almost that the clothing is taking over just because it's so much simpler than the rest of it. But yeah, somehow that happens too. But I do enjoy how it ended up looking. So I'm using the light E40s, and a tip when working with the E40s is that you have kind of an edge between when it gets too dark or when it's too light, and E44 is kind of just bang smack in the middle. So when you're doing something very, very light, if you add the E44, even the slightest amount of E44 to this, it will be a little bit harder to blend, but also you will get a lot more darkness, because the dark color in the E43 that doesn't hardly show up here will show up if you add the E44. So they kind of work against each other. And it's just like the E44 is kind of the limit for the darker E40s too. You can go in with the E43, but it doesn't blend as well. But yeah, these are my favorite pens ever. If you haven't seen a video with me before, now you know. E44 is one of those Copic pens I use in almost every creation I do, because I really love how it's a very neutral brown, so you can get away with it in any creation. So yeah. Now when the dress is starting to finish, then I'm not fully finished with all the Copic coloring, because I'm actually going in first with the E40s on her glasses to give them a little bit of a tone down, because I didn't want them to be stark white. But then I'm going in with the warm grays, which is pretty close to the E40s, and also the brownness in it will kind of be seen a little bit more when you work with other browns. But I'm using it to shade most of those little bangles, because I wanted a little bit of a dimension in them, but I'm not going to color them with the Copics, because I didn't want them to have bright super stark colors. I just wanted them to have a little bit of dimension. And that is also a tip I have. If you have something you want to shade, but you don't really have all the colors for it, you can actually go in with the grays and shade with that. However, you will have a kind of a little bit of a dirty color effect from it, and depending on if you put the grays first or after, that grayish tone will take more or less the overhand. The grays will look more gray if you put them on top of the color that you want to shade than if you put it on underneath. If you put it underneath, your color will add like a layer on top, so it will kind of pick that color up. Like if you want to have light green bangles but doesn't have the greens, you can just add the light green on top of the grays, and that will give you a shaded green. Also a tip, if you have like dresses with a lot of details, you don't have to shade every little detail. You can just do a shading in gray. If you're using sort of light shades, you can just do a shading in gray and then add your details in different colors, and you will have the shading underneath showing through. That is also makes it easier to make detailed like pattern clothing and stuff like that. And when my all my coloring here is done with the Copics, I'm going in with some glitter pens. And honestly, because I did the glitter skirt, the big dress, the video that I posted 2 days ago, I had them lying around, so I was thinking about them when I started coloring her. So I'm using a couple of different ones. I bought the package of the Atoy Spica, and I don't have that many left of them because they do dry out after a while. But the sand one is one of those that I still have ink in, so I'm using that one for a lot of details. It's very light toned brown, and it was the one I did for the gold dotting on the skirt. Also, I'm using this, it's the chocolate speaker, and it's really, really dark, and I wasn't sure that I wanted it that much or liked it that much, so I ended up just coloring a couple of them and then putting away the pen, because I realized that it is a little bit too dark and it kind of made the bangles disappear a little bit. So then I'm going in with this, which is orange. It's not super bright, but it's bright enough, and I decided that this was the kind of color detail that I wanted to have with her bangles, both in the hair and around her arms. All of these pens are glitter pens, so you will get a little bit of that glitter effect. So when you kind of turn the card to the sides, they all are shining and glittering. You will see the details a little bit better. Other pens that I'm using on this are a garnet, which is a very deep red. I went in with a peach and a clear, but I actually ended up going over most of these bangles that I didn't like with the orange, just to keep that color. And for some of the parts, I'm actually using a Jelly Roll glitter pen, metallic, number 551, which is a golden one. I looked at those pens and tried to figure out if they did have names, but I couldn't find it on the pen. But they might do have pens. But most of them come in sets, so you can get a whole metallic set. I think it's metallic and metallic glitter. I think they have two different ones. But if you want to have a whole bunch of fun glittery gel pens to do, just go to your kind of, if you're in America, it's Target, I think, have them for like nothing. I think you can find them in dollar stores, stuff like that. In Sweden, we have them at Åhléns. There's a lot of different stores that have just the cheaper gel pens. You don't have to have more expensive ones. They work the same. I think the more expensive ones does not dry out as fast, but I'm not sure. I buy the pens that I find, and this is the pens I have right now. So this is the clear pen, and I wasn't sure when I went in with those, it's like it didn't bring anything to it this time around. So as I said, I ended up going over a couple more with the orange just on the top of them. This is the peach, I think, and you see it doesn't really have the depth that does the orange have, and the orange doesn't have that much depth either. And there they all roll down because I decided to figure out which one I wanted. This is the garnet, which is a very deep red, and I think I use these like on its own is pretty deep, but I actually add it on top of red, and then you kind of see it a little bit better through it when I've been playing around it for other pictures. But yeah, this is kind of coming to the end of the video, so I want to take this time and thank you so much for watching, if you're still here. If you have any comments, any questions, anything, you can comment down below. You can send me an email, you can reach out. I'm happy to answer. If you want to see more videos like these, and like this video, thumbs it up, hit that subscribe button. Share it with your friends, do all of those fun things, and thank you for staying with me through 45 minutes of voiceover over a coloring video. Hopefully you got some good tips and tricks out of it. So yeah, thank you for watching again. Happy New Year. See you later. Bye.